In the time of the Talmud, there wasn't a Haggadah, at least not that we have nowadays. I mean, we have a mitzvah to tell the story over, but in terms of exactly how it's done, in a complete set, it's from the time of the Gaon. I mean, even the earliest prayer book is from Gaonic times, because it doesn't appear in the Talmud. The requirements appear in the Talmud, but in terms of a set book of what it's actually said, for example, it says what should be included in our Amidah, but only the first 3 brachot and the last 3 brachot are set in stone. And then everything else is sort of improvised. Now, the average person wouldn't know that nowadays because we have a whole siddur and they all pretty much emulate themselves just because they were all taken from the siddurim that the Geonim used, that they developed. Now, the Geonim didn't have smicha. I mean, it's a nice thing, but if you wanted to just take the first brachot and the last brachot and, modify things inside there, you could. For example, the Yemenites, even in their Kaddish, they added the name of Rambam to thank him for saving their community. In other words, you could improvise a lot in the prayer, but everything is set in stone now. Or even Tachanun, Tachanun, also known as Nefilat Apayim, was the portion in the Siddur where people were allowed to add their own personal prayers to God. Because Jews don't really pray nowadays. Jews recite. It's not necessarily prayer if there aren't any personal supplications. Like you're talking to God, say, God, my dog is sick, whatever. So that, even today, the rabbis have told you what to say on your personal prayers. So it's such a dumbing down. Okay, fine. I mean, you should do what people do for the sake of your family. You should at least know better.
They read it so fast. That's the only thing that I don't like about praying. You got to read so fast. I don't see how anyone can really do it with kavana.
Prayer back then was a lot quicker than prayer today, just because they didn't add so many things and so many kadishes. So you would have more time. It's always good to know history. This is why I include that as one of the 3 main things you have to study, which is halakha, the 5 books, and history, Jewish history. When you realize when a lot of these things were developed, then you're able to see it was developed in the year 800, then it's optional. Now, when you're really trying to split hairs and you see something in the Gemara that kind of doesn't sound right, the rabbis in the Gemara didn't have smicha, with the exception of 1 or 2 of them, but the Amoraim didn't have smicha. They're commenting on the words of people who did have smicha, the Tanaim. So there's checks and balances on everything, and there's a hierarchy to everything. This is why if you follow a rabbi who just says everything is given on Mount Sinai, even books that were printed today were given on Mount Sinai, and everything is oral law, and whatever they want to get canonized with the pen of divine inspiration, they'll call it oral law, including their books and this and that, then find yourself a new rabbi. Because you're about to enter OCD Judaism. Now, some people have a fanatical streak to them. And these are people who come from the Pentecostal movement, and they'll hop into Satmar and Hasidut and extremism, but your kids suffer for that, man, and your wife suffers for that. If you like doing it, you better marry someone who's just as fanatical. But some people don't. And I think the best way to express it is the way I define modern orthodoxy, which is doing what's required, considering what's optional. That's it. You consider it. Now, if your rabbi is an idiot, he's going to say everything is mandatory and nothing's optional. But that's how you could tell how academically sound and sophisticated your religion is by how many optional beliefs it claims to have.
Is there a genealogy on this smicha, or the rabbinical smicha?
No one nowadays has actual smicha, but the Hagdama of the Rambam, that means in the forward to Mishnah Torah, it lists down the transmission of smicha all the way from Moses to the last people who had smicha. And I believe it also appears in Pirkei Avot. It appears also.
I was just saying, who do you know of the last people that had smicha?
In and around the time of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, Rabbi Hillel Bet, it was that court. You're talking about the year 300 something.
Gotcha. So, the Sanhedrin was still...
The Sanhedrin was still kicking back then, yeah.
Yeah, that's what
Hillel Bet is the guy who developed the calendar. Not necessarily developed. There's a debate on whether he developed it or he just reinstituted it. Because supposedly we used this calendar, this calculated calendar, other times that we didn't have the temple. But he's the guy who instituted it. So there's a big debate here because the Torah says that they will judge from the place that I will choose. Now, what place did God choose? At least not in Torah. That place was Jerusalem. And what authority could the court have if they were kicked off the Temple Mount? That's a serious question. So the understanding is that when it says the place I will choose, I mean, God doesn't walk around choosing places. He does it through the elders. The elders moved the Mishkan from Shiloh to other places till it eventually stayed in Jerusalem. But that doesn't mean that because they were kicked out of Jerusalem, that the court had no more authority. Because these individuals were the descendants, the academic descendants of the original elders, they chose from Jerusalem to Yavne, to Tveria. So
And even Babylon, right? I mean,
the court can't sit outside of Israel. And also, smicha can't be given outside of Israel. That when the rabbis were already in Babylon, there was no more smicha. Now, there were Jews in Babylon during the time of the Second Temple. For example, Hillel lived in Babylon. He was originally from Israel, and then he moved to Babylon, and then he came back. And then when he came back, they made him the Nasi.
so there was no way, I'm just curious if you know, there was no way that they could just go to Jerusalem and, like do the ordination or whatever for the smicha and then continue the lineage. I mean, why was it lost?
I don't know. I'm just repeating what I read. It appears in the
Were they
Talmud. I
being
don't
killed
remember.
off, or
It had to do with the Romans, because the Romans in some way said that anyone caught giving smicha would be killed. I mean, these are portions that people don't study, so it's hard to even research it. Like the best website that has all these underground arguments is that forum called Miyodea.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, it has people who think outside the box. Because trust me, the stuff that we study on this Hangout are not things that you can Google. If it's on reincarnation and demons, and there's thousands of pages on Google on it. I mean, that's like fluffy Judaism, right? But real meat, the building blocks, things that rabbis don't want you to know, because you'll be challenging them.
In regards to knowing and being able to prove that the Messiah, because Jews are still waiting on the Messiah, prove that he's of David, since we don't have the bloodline lineage anymore. Like, we don't
Right.
have any of those records.
So what records are you talking about?
Birthline lineage records. Hedron in the temple held that.
All right, so that's a misconception. I don't
What do you-
think that appears anywhere that records were kept in the temple of the Sanhedrin. I've heard Messianics make that claim, but I've never seen that anywhere. And then after the temple was burned, all those records were lost. That's a Messianic claim.
What is
That being
the
said, there's many rabbis nowadays who know that they're from the line of David. And how do they know? They don't have to trace it all the way back to David, but they just have to trace it all the way back to a rabbi 1,000 years ago who also claims to be from the line of David. For example, the Rambam is from the line of David. So there's many rabbis nowadays who are descendants of the Rambam. Even the Lubavitcher Rebbe claims to be a descendant of the line of David. This is stuff that you're not going to know outside of the Jewish world. But there's many rabbis who claim to be from the Davidic line. Just like there's many people who claim to be Kohanim.
Well, what I'm saying is, like, okay, and I'm not, this is no disrespect to anyone, but like, mom can claim that, oh, your dad is this person, but may not really be. You know what I mean? So like, how is there proof? Because even like in the New Testament, Yeshua was supposed to be Joseph. So I mean, it's like, how are the record? You know what I'm trying to say?
Now, the Torah doesn't say that a Messiah has to come from the line of David, nor does the Torah mention the idea of a Messiah. The Torah doesn't say that we anoint kings. So, honestly, it's a legend amongst the Jewish people. Now, the halacha is that a king does not have to come from the line of Judah. Anyone from any tribe could be a king. However, the tradition is that the Messiah has to come from David. There's another further understanding that it's not just David, but it's Solomon through David. And this is how the Rambam holds. In his letter to the Yemenites in Eger Teman, he says that it has to be through Solomon, because that's pretty much what one statement in Tanakh says. I mean, this is the discussion I had with Michael Brown. He was like, no, that it doesn't have to be through Solomon. He said the Rambam didn't teach it. Now, it's true, he didn't teach it in Mishneh Torah, but he did teach it in his Parsha Mishnayot and in his Eger Teman. In Genesis 49, the notion of Shiloh, which doesn't really mean Shiloh, it seems that the power to rule is left on Judah. So someone could say, all right, Judah, David, okay, possibly, right? But the whole notion of David and the line of David is a non-Torah idea. So I wouldn't worry about that because
Got it.
no, most Jews don't teach that. Most Jews don't teach that anyone could be king of Israel.
Well, the reason why I ask is there's a guy who does videos. His name is Corey, and he does videos of what like Arabs think and what Israelis think and things like that. And he asks questions that are sent in to him. And like one of the questions is, how are you going to know when the Messiah comes? Like, where's your proof? Because the Tanakh talks about being from David, blah, blah, blah. And they basically just say, well, we'll know whenever he establishes the temple. We'll know when he takes over and he does this and he does that. And it's just like, so basically works. Like, you're not going to know for sure. I mean, and I think I've even heard Tovia mention like DNA testing before. And it's like, oh, where's that at in the scriptures? I mean, because it just doesn't make any sense that Christians are bashed so hard for like making up a theology or making up an excuse but then like a Jew, if he doesn't have an answer, it's acceptable to say, oh, well, we'll just DNA test him. Well, I think it's pretty clear that DNA testing is not going to, because like, I know many people have Jewish blood. I mean, it's just the way it is.
It doesn't apply in halakha. I'm surprised
Right.
he even said that. But,
I'll have to go back and find the video, but I swear I'm not lying.
But don't worry, Jews don't get a free ride here either. Everyone gets challenged. I won't put up with that silly stuff. No, they hold Messianics to a different standard. Standard is truth. Like if you're making up crap, then I mean you're just as uninformed.
Like